Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Let's drift into a soothing story together as you begin your journey into a restful and rejuvenating sleep. Lena and Ella had been inseparable since childhood, their lives forever intertwined by the threads of shared memories. From the first time they met, as young children running through fields of wildflowers, their bond grew like the sturdy roots of an ancient tree, quiet, unwavering, and deeply rooted in the soil of their shared experiences. They lived in a small village nestled between rolling hills and vast forests, a world both beautiful and simple, where the sky stretched endlessly and the days seemed to pass slowly, like soft waves lapping at the shore. The light of a warm afternoon often found them together, talking about everything and nothing, exploring the wonders of their childhood worlds. Ella was the free spirit, full of vibrant energy, always dreaming of adventures beyond the hills. She would often speak of the distant lands she longed to visit, places filled with mystery, excitement, and endless possibilities. Lena, on the other hand, was the more grounded one, her feet planted firmly in reality, yet just as curious about the world around her. She was the listener, the one who carefully absorbed everything, her mind always thinking ahead, imagining a future where both of them could be part of something greater. Their connection was a dance, delicate and harmonious like the soft sway of tree branches in the wind. It was built on mutual respect, love, and an understanding of one another's dreams, flaws, and hopes. Ella's adventurous spirit complemented Lena's practicality, and Lena's stable nature was the perfect anchor for Ella's boundless imagination. Together, they balanced each other, each woman completing the other in ways no one else could. Their conversations were full of laughter and shared secrets, their bond solidified with every shared moment, every whispered promise to always stand by one another, no matter what life threw at them. As the years passed, their connection deepened, becoming more than just friendship. It became a kind of soul-deep bond, the kind that could not be broken by time, distance, or the changing seasons. Whether it was schoolyard secrets or shared dreams of the future, their friendship was a sacred space, a constant in an ever-shifting world. Even as they grew older and their lives began to follow different paths, that unspoken promise remained. Lena always knew when Ella was close, even without seeing her. She could feel the excitement in the air, the way the world seemed to brighten when Ella entered a room. Similarly, Ella knew Lena's steady presence, that quiet strength that grounded her when her dreams seemed too big to contain. They never needed to say much. They understood each other on a level that went beyond words. In every silence, in every look, they communicated a truth deeper than any conversation could convey. They were meant to be together, side by side, forever. One particular evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the village in a warm golden glow, Ella and Lena sat together in their favorite spot, a quiet clearing by the river, surrounded by tall grass and wildflowers. The air was thick with the scent of summer, the hum of insects, and the occasional chirp of birds filling the silence. They sat with their legs stretched out before them, the soft grass tickling their skin as they gazed out over the river, watching the water ripple gently by Ella, always the dreamer, turned to Lena with a smile, her eyes gleaming with that familiar spark. "Do you ever wonder what's out there?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of years of shared dreams. "Beyond the hills, beyond the village, what's waiting for us? I want to see it all, every corner of the world." Lena smiled softly, her heart full of affection for her best friend. She had always known that Ella's spirit could never be confined, that one day she would venture far beyond the safety of their village. But Lena's gaze remained steady, focused on the here and now, on the bond they shared. "I think we'll find our way," she said gently, her voice calm but firm. "Wherever life takes us, we'll always have each other." And in that moment, amidst the gentle rustling of the trees and the fading light of the day, it felt as if the entire world paused. The future, uncertain and filled with possibilities, seemed far away. For now, in this space, there was only them, Ella and Lena, two souls entwined in an unspoken promise, sharing a bond that would remain unbroken for as long as the sun continued to rise as the days passed. And the seasons slowly began to change. Ella and Lena's lives began to take different paths. It wasn't a sudden change, but a gradual shift, like a tree growing in different directions. Its branches no longer aligned with the others. The bond they had once shared so effortlessly began to face its first real test. Ella's dreams of adventure and exploration grew stronger, and her desire to leave the village and discover the world beyond became more pressing. Every evening, she would talk about the places she imagined seeing, the stories she wanted to write, and the new experiences she hoped to embrace. She was like a bird yearning to fly, her wings spread wide, but the weight of responsibility kept her tethered to the earth. Her passion and excitement were infectious, but it wasn't long before Lena began to feel the pull of anxiety. While Ella dreamed of distant lands and new beginnings, Lena's thoughts remained rooted in their small, quiet village. Lena was the one who kept the fabric of their shared life together, working at the small local bookstore, helping their parents with daily tasks, and participating in the events that brought the community together. To Lena, the village wasn't a cage, it was home. It was where her heart found peace and stability, and the idea of leaving felt like a loss she couldn't bear. Lena's concerns about Ella's growing restlessness became more apparent as they spent less time together. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now carried a quieter, more tentative tone. The familiar rhythms of their days together had become sporadic, as if they were two dancers who had lost their steps. Ella's enthusiasm for her journey seemed to overshadow Lena's quiet contentment, and as Ella spoke of leaving, Lena grew more distant, her silence growing heavier with each passing day. Asterisk. There was a moment one afternoon as they sat by the river, a place they had often visited together, that the rift first became clear. The sunlight danced on the surface of the water, casting shimmering patterns that seemed to echo the once perfect connection between them. Lena, looking down at the river, said quietly, "Ella, what if you leave? What if you go and I'm still Here, stuck in this place. Her voice was gentle, but there was a raw edge to it, one that made the air around them feel heavier. Ella looked at her, her eyes wide with surprise. You think I'd leave you behind? You know I could never do that. But Lena wasn't so sure anymore. She had spent so many years being Ella's anchor, supporting her in ways that sometimes felt like sacrifices. She had put Ella's dreams before her own, always being the practical one, the one who held everything together. Now, as Ella's plans to leave began to take shape, Lena wondered whether their friendship could truly withstand the distance that was inevitably coming between them. I know you'd never leave me intentionally, Lena said, her voice soft. But the words felt like an insurmountable wall between them. But what if we change so much that we can't even recognize each other anymore? What if we just grow apart? The silence that followed was heavy, thick with things left unsaid. Ella's heart tightened at the thought, but she also felt a growing sense of freedom, a part of her that longed to experience life outside the confines of her safe, familiar world. I don't want us to change, Ella said quietly, her voice filled with a new uncertainty. But I need to find out who I am without always being what everyone expects me to be. Lena swallowed, her throat tight. She had always known Ella was destined for more than this small village, but now that the moment was approaching, it didn't feel like the dreams Ella was chasing could coexist with the reality Lena had built. The world that once felt so bright and full of possibility now seemed so distant, so far beyond her reach. And the thought of losing the person who had always been her closest companion was a fear she hadn't prepared for. The rift was not just between the two friends, but within Lena herself. She could feel the world pulling her in two different directions. The life she had built and the dreams she had shared with Ella. Could their friendship survive this growing distance? Could they hold on to the love they had always known, even as they changed into different people? The afternoon passed in silence, the tension between them thick, though neither of them spoke it aloud. They had shared so many moments of joy and laughter, but now it felt as though a quiet sadness had settled over them, one that neither of them had expected to encounter. They had always believed their bond was unbreakable, but now, for the first time, it felt fragile, like the first crack in a carefully built vase. As they parted ways that evening, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them, something that couldn't be undone with a few kind words. And Lena, too, felt that something was slipping through her fingers, just beyond her grasp. As the days passed, the distance between Ella and Lena only seemed to grow, even though they still tried to meet each other halfway. Their once effortless connection now felt like something fragile, something that could shatter with the slightest touch. Lena, in her quiet way, had begun to withdraw, retreating into herself, while Ella, caught up in her dreams and ambitions, failed to notice the subtle changes in her friend. Lena's fear of losing Ella was becoming more real, and she began to question whether the foundation of their friendship could truly withstand the differences that were widening between them. The memories of their shared experiences, laughing until they cried, Comforting each other through childhood fears felt like a distant echo. Was that bond still enough to hold them together, or had they both changed too much? The breaking point came unexpectedly during a moment of vulnerability. It was a cool autumn evening, the kind where the chill in the air made everything feel quiet and still. Ella, as usual, was talking excitedly about her plans to leave for the city and pursue her dreams, painting pictures of the adventures that awaited her. But this time, there was something different in the way Lena responded. There was a hesitation in her voice that Ella had never heard before. "I don't think I can do this anymore." "Ella," Lena said softly, her eyes not meeting Ella's. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Ella looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, unsure of the depth of the silence that had fallen between them. Lena took a deep breath, her chest tight with emotion. "I've tried to understand," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But every time you talk about leaving, about going away to find yourself, I feel like I'm losing you. I feel like I'm not enough anymore. I'm scared, Ella, scared that we're not going to be the same once you're gone." The words hit Ella like a sudden storm. She hadn't realized just how much her decision was affecting Lena, Ella's. Heart ached as she saw the pain in her friend's eyes, but her own confusion only deepened. "Lena, I'll always come back," she said, trying to reassure her. But there was a growing sadness in her voice that she couldn't ignore. "No, I don't know that," Lena replied, her voice steady but filled with an emotion that was raw and unfiltered. "You say that now, but what if you don't? What if, when you leave, you find something that changes you completely? What if we both change, and when you return, we won't even recognize each other anymore?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Ella's chest tightened with the realization that Lena's fears were not just about her leaving. They were about losing the connection that had always been the cornerstone of their lives. It wasn't just about the city or her dreams. It was about the loss of everything they had shared. Ella tried to find the right words, but nothing seemed to break through the wall of uncertainty that had risen between them. "Lena, please," she began, but the words faltered on her lips. She realized then that she had been so focused on her own journey, on her own future, that she had failed to truly listen to the person who had been by her side for as long as she could remember. Lena stood up, her face pale but determined. I can't do this anymore, Ella. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with losing you. And I can't keep pretending that things won't change." She turned away, walking slowly to the door, the weight of her words hanging between them like a heavy fog. Ella felt her heart crack as she watched Lena leave. She had never seen her friend so broken, so distant. The trust they had once shared, a trust built on years of mutual understanding and respect, felt like it was slipping through her fingers, like sand through an open hand. She had always believed that their bond was unbreakable, but now she was left with the painful realization that nothing lasts forever if you don't tend to it. The silence in the room was deafening. It was the kind of silence that felt like an empty space, a chasm between two people who once knew each other better than anyone else in the world. But now there was no understanding, no shared dreams. There was only distance, emotional and physical. Weeks passed since that fateful evening, and the silence between Ella and Lena hung heavily in the air. The distance between them was palpable, like an invisible wall neither of them could bring themselves to tear down. Ella, torn by the weight of the words Lena had spoken, spent her days trying to focus on her future, but the emptiness of her fractured friendship consumed her thoughts. She missed Lena more than she could put into words, but she didn't know how to bridge the gap that had formed between them. Lena, on the other hand, spent much of her time in quiet reflection. She tried to fill the space Ella had once occupied with her familiar routines, but something felt off. The absence of Ella's voice, the absence of their shared laughter was too much to bear. She had pushed Ella away out of fear of the unknown, fear of change, and fear that their friendship was no longer sustainable. But she realized, in the quiet of her own heart, that she had made a mistake. The loss of Ella's friendship felt more like a wound that couldn't heal, and Lena knew she couldn't live with it forever. One stormy afternoon, as the wind howled outside and the rain tapped rhythmically against the windows, Ella sat alone in her room, holding a small notebook she had kept since childhood. It was filled with sketches, notes, and dreams she had written over the years, memories of their shared experiences. Flipping through the pages, she came across a page from a few years ago, a drawing of Lena and herself, arms linked, both with wide smiles. Beneath it, she had written, "No matter where life takes us, we'll always be together." Ella's heart tightened as she looked at the drawing. The words on the page were a reminder of the bond they had once shared, a bond she didn't want to lose. It was then that she realized she couldn't just move on without attempting to make amends, without trying to mend what had been broken. Determined, Ella took a deep breath and walked to Lena's house, the rain falling in sheets around her. Her heart raced with every step, but there was a sense of resolve in her that she hadn't felt in a long time. She had spent so many days avoiding this confrontation, afraid of the pain, afraid of the rejection. But she knew that if they were to have any chance of rebuilding their friendship, she had to face the consequences of her actions. Lena was sitting by the fire when Ella knocked on the door. The familiar sound of the rain outside and the warmth of the hearth created a quiet, intimate atmosphere, one that would have felt comfortable had it not been for the weight of the past few weeks. When Lena opened the door, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was still thick, but there was a soft vulnerability in the air, a kind of unspoken understanding that neither could ignore. "I'm sorry, Lena," Ella said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "I've been selfish, and I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing by following my dreams, but I was blind to the hurt I was causing you." Lena didn't say anything immediately. She looked at Ella, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of understanding, perhaps. After a long pause, Lena finally spoke, her voice gentle yet firm. I was scared, Ella, Lena said quietly. I didn't want to lose you, and I didn't know how to handle it when everything started to change. But I've had time to think, and I realized now that I was holding on to something that wasn't fair to either of us. I didn't want you to leave, but I also didn't want you to feel like you had to stay because of me. The weight that had been hanging between them seemed to lift ever so slightly. The vulnerability they both shared in this moment felt like a shift, a turning point. The quiet tension that had kept them apart for so long began to ease, replaced by something more tender forgiveness. Neither of them had the perfect words, but they didn't need them. The honesty in their voices, the willingness to face the pain and the fear, was enough to begin healing the rift that had formed between them. That Ella stepped forward, taking Lena's hand in her own. I don't want to lose you either, Ella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. No matter where life takes us, you'll always be a part of me. Lena nodded, squeezing Ella's hand in return. For the first time in what felt like forever, they stood together in a shared silence, both of them understanding the unspoken truth. They had both grown, and change had been inevitable. But the love they had for each other was stronger than any obstacle life could throw their way. That night, they sat by the fire together, not as they once were, but as new versions of themselves, both scarred but wiser, both vulnerable yet stronger for it. As the rain fell outside and the warmth of the fire wrapped around them, they began to talk again, slowly, tentatively at first, about everything they had missed in each other's lives. The healing process had begun, and with it came the realization that true friendship was not about staying the same, but about accepting change. Understanding that love can be reborn even after it has been tested. The days following their reconciliation felt like a gentle exhale after a long-held breath. Ella and Lena's friendship had weathered its first true test, and although the cracks in their relationship would always remain, they were no longer the defining feature of their bond. Instead, their conversations began to flow freely again, though they were tinged with a newfound depth, the result of the lessons learned, the personal growth, and the emotional healing they had gone through. Ella had left for the city not long after their conversation, as her dreams had always drawn her to a life beyond the village. But this time, when she left, it wasn't with the same feeling of escape that had once marked her departure. This time, there was a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that her journey was her own, but it didn't have to come at the cost of the connections she held dear. The distance between her and Lena was still there, but it was no longer something they feared. It was something they had both learned to embrace. Over the months that passed, their bond began to evolve in ways that neither of them had expected. Ella's life in the city was full of excitement and new experiences, but she made sure to stay in touch with Lena, even if it was just through a quick message or a late-night phone call. Lena, too, found herself stepping outside of her comfort zone, embracing the changes in her life. She no longer felt like she had to hold on to the past, to the way things had been. Instead, she began to focus more on the present, on the relationships she was building within the village, on the new opportunities she was creating for herself. She had realized that her worth was not tied to Ella, that she could thrive on her own while still cherishing the friendship they shared. One evening, as autumn settled over the village, painting the trees with shades of gold and crimson, Ella returned for a visit. The reunion wasn't grand, nor was it filled with the same intensity as their past moments. This time, their meeting was quiet, soft, a reminder of the comfortable silence they had once shared. They met in their favorite spot, the same clearing, by the river where the sunset cast a warm glow over the landscape. "I missed you," Lena said, her voice steady but full of warmth. Her words weren't an apology, nor were they a declaration of a need that had been unfulfilled. It was simply a truth, shared between them with a sense of acceptance. "I missed you too," Ella replied, the simplicity of her words holding a weight of their own. They had both changed, but in that moment it didn't matter. They were still there for each other, still standing beside one another. They sat together, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery shades of red and orange. The world around them was quiet, the sounds of the river gently flowing in the background, the breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. It was in the stillness that they both realized something important. They had grown, and they had each found their own path, but the foundation of their friendship was still as solid as it had ever been. They had endured, they had forgiven, and now they had reconciled. Their friendship was no longer about holding on to the past. It was about embracing the future, about moving forward together in a new, more mature way. For the first time in a long while, they both felt at peace. Ella and Lena were no longer two halves of a whole, but two individuals who had come together again, not because they had to, but because they chose to. They chose each other, and that choice was stronger than any of the challenges they had faced. Conversation that evening was easy, full of laughter and gentle teasing, like it always had been. But there was something deeper now, something unspoken but understood between them, the strength of unbreakable friendship. They had learned that true friendship isn't about holding on tightly, about making the other person stay. It was about support, acceptance, and the ability to let each other go and grow while knowing that you would always find your way back to each other. As the evening turned into night and the stars began to twinkle above them, they both realized that their friendship was no longer just a constant in their lives. It was a choice to stand by each other no matter where life took them. And that in itself was enough. As the seasons changed and the cold winds of winter began to blow through the village, Ella and Lena's friendship entered a new phase. Their paths had diverged, yet they found themselves on parallel journeys, different, yet somehow still the same. They no longer spent every day together, but the space between them felt full, not of absence, but of mutual understanding. Their bond had been tested, but they had emerged from it stronger, more resilient, and more certain of the depth of their connection. One crisp morning, Lena received a letter from Ella, a simple piece of paper, folded neatly and sealed with a wax emblem. It was the first letter Ella had sent since her move to the city, and though it was just a small gesture, It filled Lena with a warmth she hadn't expected. She opened the letter slowly, savoring the weight of the moment, as if the simple act of receiving a letter from her friend was enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. The letter was filled with details of Ella's new life, her adventures, the people she had met, the places she had visited. But there was something different in this letter, something that stood out in the quiet, deliberate way Ella spoke of the future. She wrote, "I miss you, Lena, more than I realized. The world is vast, but some things, some people are replaceable. I've learned a lot here, but there's still so much I don't understand. I think of you often, and I'm beginning to realize that home isn't just a place. It's the people who make it what it is. You've always been my home, and I can't wait to see you again." Asterisk Lena's eyes filled with tears as she read the words, each one carrying the weight of all the unspoken emotions they had shared over the years. Ella had always been the one to take the first step in their friendship, always the one to chase after new horizons, while Lena had stayed behind, rooted in the familiar. But now, in her letter, Ella was acknowledging the importance of their connection, acknowledging that the world she was exploring was incomplete without the person who had always been by her side. Lena placed the letter down, taking a deep breath. As the words settled in her heart, she hadn't realized how much she had missed Ella's voice, how much she had longed for the sound of her laughter and the warmth of her presence. But now there was no sadness, no sense of loss. There was only hope, the quiet certainty that their bond, no matter how far apart they were, would always be there. That evening, as Lena sat by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered hills, she felt something shift within her. The world was still changing, still pulling her in directions she hadn't expected, but she was no longer afraid. She understood now that change wasn't something to fear. It was simply a part of life, a part of growth. And as long as they both carried each other in their hearts, they would always find their way back to one another. A few months later, after a long period of anticipation, Ella returned to the village. The reunion was quiet, unspoken, but full of the emotion that had built up between them over the months. They stood together in the same clearing by the river, the place that had always been their sanctuary. The world had changed, but in this moment, they felt as though time had slowed down, allowing them to savor the simplicity of just being together again. "Welcome home," Lena said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Ella smiled and took a deep breath, the cool air of the village filling her lungs. She looked at Lena, feeling that familiar comfort return, the sense of belonging that had always been with her, even when she was far away. "It's good to be back," Ella replied, her voice full of quiet sincerity. "I didn't realize how much I needed you." They stood there for a long time, side by side, watching the sunset as the sky painted shades of pink and orange. The silence was not uncomfortable, but peaceful, as if they had reached a place of complete understanding where words were unnecessary. They didn't need to explain everything. The bond between them was enough. As the sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle above, they walked back to the village together. The future still lay ahead of them, full of unknowns and challenges. But they both knew one thing for certain: no matter where life took them, they would always have each other. Their friendship had survived the trials of time, change, and distance, and it had come out stronger, more solid than before. In this quiet moment, they both understood the beauty of growth and the undeniable strength of true friendship. As the weeks passed, Ella and Lena continued to navigate their renewed friendship with a newfound depth. Their paths in life were still diverging, yet they had found a way to exist together without the tension that once clouded their connection. Ella had become more involved in the creative circles of the city, while Lena continued her work in the village, helping the local community, but something had changed between them. They no longer carried the heavy burden of resentment or fear. Instead, they shared a quiet understanding that they could grow independently, yet remain an integral part of each other's lives. One evening, as autumn leaves began to fall, and the crisp air signaled the arrival of another season, Ella invited Lena to join her on a trip to one of the countryside retreats she had discovered during her time in the city. It was an invitation that didn't come from a place of duty or obligation, but from a sincere desire to share the world she had come to know with the person who had always stood by her side. It was their way of saying that no matter how much their lives changed, they were still intertwined, still connected by a bond that time and distance couldn't break. The retreat was located in a secluded forest, surrounded by towering trees, whose leaves danced in shades of orange and red. The air was fresh, crisp with the scent of pine, and the rustling of leaves provided a natural melody to their walk. As they wandered through the woods, there was a sense of tranquility in the space between them. The journey they were on was not one of rushing toward a specific destination, but of simply being together in the moment, enjoying the silence and companionship that had once felt so familiar but had been lost in the distance between them. "Ella," Lena said softly, breaking the peaceful quiet that had settled over them. "I never realized how much I needed you." Ella turned to face her, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I think we both needed this. Not just the quiet, but the chance to realize that our friendship doesn't need to fit into the box we once thought it had to." Lena nodded, the weight of those words settling into her heart. "I was afraid, afraid that if we let go of what we had, we'd lose everything." Ella reached out, gently placing her hand on Lena's. "I was too. But we've learned that sometimes letting go of the past doesn't mean we have to lose the future. It means we make room for something new." There was a moment of stillness between them as the wind rustled through the trees, the soft murmur of nature around them, a reminder of the world beyond their lives. They were no longer the same people who had first walked these paths together, but that wasn't something to mourn. It was something to celebrate. As they continued walking, a gentle breeze blew through the forest, and Lena felt as though the weight of the years they had spent apart had been lifted. The world felt softer now, not because everything had been fixed, but because they had learned to accept the changes in themselves and in each other. When they reached the clearing, Where the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, they sat, side by side, watching as the light faded and the stars began to emerge. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt timeless like an anchor, not just to the past, but to the future they could still share, even if it looked different than before. Do you remember we used to sit here as kids? Lena asked, her voice low and contemplative. We would talk for hours, imagining all the things we'd do when we grew up. Ella laughed softly, her eyes gleaming with nostalgia. I remember. We used to think the world would be exactly what we dreamed it would be. Lena smiled, her eyes soft with the understanding that both of them had changed, and that was okay. I think it is in its own way, she said. We're still dreaming, just in different ways. Maybe that's the most important thing, Ella said, her voice gentle but filled with certainty. To keep dreaming, to keep evolving, and to always come back to what matters. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars as they blinked to life in the deepening sky. The future stretched before them, filled with endless possibilities, but in that moment, they both knew that whatever happened, they had something more than just memories. They had a shared understanding, a bond that no amount of time or change could sever. As the evening grew darker, they stood up together, ready to walk back to the retreat, where warmth and comfort awaited them. There was no rush, no urgency. Just two people, side by side, as they always had been, navigating the world in their own ways, but still sharing in the beauty of life's journey. As the autumn days passed into the chill of winter, the friendship between Ella and Lena blossomed into something stronger and more peaceful than it had ever been before. The past was no longer a place of regret or longing. It was a foundation upon which they had rebuilt. They had both taken their separate journeys, but now they saw that their paths didn't need to be parallel to remain intertwined. The distance had taught them that sometimes the greatest connections are the ones that allow for change, the ones that evolve instead of remaining fixed. Lena found herself pursuing new ventures in the village, including starting a small business focused on helping other women in the community develop their own crafts. It was something she had always wanted to do, but had put off for fear of stepping outside her comfort zone. She was learning that she was capable of much more than she had ever believed. Her confidence had grown, and she no longer feared what the future held. She was ready to embrace it fully, just as she had embraced the changes in her friendship. With Ella. Meanwhile, Ella's life in the city had blossomed into a whirlwind of creative opportunities. She was surrounded by inspiring artists, passionate individuals, and endless possibilities. But it wasn't the newness of the city life that had her heart. It was the quiet assurance that she had made the right choice for herself. The distance between her and Lena was now just a number, not a separation. She no longer saw their different lives as barriers, but as unique experiences that would only strengthen their bond. They were growing together, not apart. Ella came back to visit often, and each time it was as if the two of them had never been apart. They found comfort in the shared moments, no longer overwhelmed by the fear of losing one another. They would spend hours talking, walking through the fields where they once dreamed about the future, enjoying the peaceful silence that was now a symbol of the strength between them. Sometimes they would visit the retreat in the woods, just as they had done on that first trip. But now, it wasn't to repair their friendship, it was to celebrate it. The landscape, once a reminder of unspoken distance, had transformed into a space where they could feel whole, where they could simply enjoy the present without the weight of past insecurities. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, they found themselves once again in the village clearing, sitting by the fire with mugs of hot chocolate. The winter air was crisp, and the stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever. There was a calmness about the night, a stillness that mirrored the way their lives had found their equilibrium. Neither of them spoke at first. They simply sat there, looking at the snow-covered world around them, breathing in the scent of pine and freshly fallen snow. "I've learned something," Lena said after a while, breaking the silence. "What's that?" Ella asked, her voice soft out. Lena smiled, her eyes sparkling in the firelight. "I've learned that the most important things in life are the things that give you peace, the things that make you feel like you belong. I've always searched for happiness outside myself, but I think I've finally figured it out. It's not about finding the right job or the right place. It's about finding the right people, the ones who will always accept you for who you are. You're one of those people, Ella." Ella's heart warmed at Lena's words. She knew what Lena meant. Their friendship had always been based on this acceptance, this ability to understand each other despite their differences. It wasn't about agreeing on everything. It was about loving each other through it all. "I feel the same way," Ella replied. "No matter where we go, I'll always carry you with me. You're part of me, Lena. We've been through so much together, and now we're ready for what's next." They both looked up at the stars, their faces illuminated by the fire. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt the need to rush toward it. They had made their peace with the past, and now all they had to do was continue to walk together. There was no grand plan, no lofty goal. There was only the shared present, the feeling of belonging, and the understanding that whatever happened, they would face it side by side. The future could wait. For now, they had this moment, this quiet, beautiful moment where their friendship was a constant, a companion, and a reminder that some connections, the truly important ones, never fade. Asterisk with the winter months settling. Over the village, the days grew quieter, more introspective. Ella and Lena had embraced the new rhythms of their individual lives, but the strength of their connection never wavered. In the time since their heartfelt reunion, both women had carved out their own paths, but the deep sense of shared history remained as solid as ever. Ella, now flourishing in the city, had found herself immersed in a world of opportunities. Her creativity had blossomed, and with each passing day, she found more fulfillment in her art and in the relationship she was building. But even with all the excitement of the city, she often found herself thinking of Lena, the quiet village, the shared memories, and the beautiful simplicity of their earlier connection. Those things had become treasures. Ella cherished more than ever before. Yet, despite the flourishing of her career, there were still moments when Ella questioned whether the path she had chosen was truly her own or one she had picked in search of something undefined. Was she running towards something, or was she running away from something? The questions lingered, and there was a time when she felt the emptiness of having achieved her dreams, only to realize she missed the connection that once defined her. Life, her bond with Lena. For Lena, life had continued on in the village, but with a subtle transformation. She had grown, not just in how she viewed herself, but also in how she engaged with the world. No longer confined to the shadows of her own doubts, Lena had found peace in her work, offering a helping hand to other women, teaching them what she had learned over the years about confidence and self-worth. She was no longer the woman who stayed behind for fear of change. Now, she was creating her own future, a future full of possibility, but even as she moved forward, Lena still felt a quiet yearning, a pull toward Ella, who had always been her constant, her closest friend. Though Lena had come to accept that change was inevitable, there was a part of her that missed the days when they could sit side by side, carefree, talking about the future they imagined. The connection they once shared had been profound, but it had evolved in a way she hadn't expected. And she had learned to be grateful for it, even if it had been different from what she had imagined. Their intermittent visits, though brief, became a cherished routine. Each time Ella returned to the village, the warmth of their shared spaces rekindled a sense of belonging between them, reminding them both that despite everything that had changed, there was something that would always remain, their unspoken bond. It wasn't a clinging to the past, but rather an embracing of what had become a deeper, more resilient friendship. One evening in early spring, when the first buds of new life began to appear on the trees and the world seemed to awaken again, Lena found herself at the old clearing by the river. The air smelled of fresh earth, and the sound of the river flowing gently over the stones filled the space with a comforting hum. She stood there, looking out over the water, reflecting on the months that had passed. As if on cue, she felt a familiar presence beside her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel the warmth, the steady calm of Ella. "You're back," Lena said softly, her voice quiet but filled with affection. She hadn't realized how much she had missed the moments of stillness, the simple connection that had always been part of her and Ella's bond. "I am," Ella replied, her voice gentle, yet carrying a certain calmness that came from the deep reflection she had been through. "I've been thinking about you, about everything, and I think I've finally come to terms with something." Lena turned to face her, her eyes reflecting the same peace that had settled in her heart. "Over time." "What's that?" Ella smiled softly, her eyes soft and filled with a warmth that only time and understanding could bring. "I've learned that I don't have to have all the answers to feel fulfilled. But there's something I know for sure. I don't want to be away from you." The words hung in the air as if nothing needed to be added. Yet everything that needed to be said had been spoken in that simple truth. The emotional tension between them, the distance that had once felt insurmountable, had dissipated. It wasn't because everything was perfect, it never would be, It was because they had come to understand that what mattered most was not perfection, but the willingness to face each other, to face the future together. Lena smiled warmly, a weight lifting off her shoulders, feeling the burden of her doubts and fears dissipate. I've always known that, Ella. I think I just needed to hear it from you. The two of them stood there, side by side, as the sunset painted the sky with shades of gold and purple, the air warm against their skin. Change was inevitable, yes, but this moment right here felt timeless, like everything they had been through had brought them to this place where they could walk forward together, not as two people bound by the past, but as two souls ready to embrace the future in their own ways. With a final contented sigh, Lena turned to Ella. So, what's next? Ella grinned, her heart light. I think we're just going to take it one day at a time. And in that moment, both of them knew that whatever happened in the future, they would face it together, side by side. No longer just living in each other's shadows, but truly standing together, ready for whatever came next. The seasons continued to change, and as spring gave way to the warmth of summer, Ella and Lena found themselves at a crossroads once more. The world around them was alive with possibility, as flowers bloomed in the village gardens, and the air was filled with the hum of life. Yet, as vibrant as the world was, the most significant change for them was the quiet understanding that had developed between them. Their reunion had not just healed old wounds, but had transformed the nature of their friendship into something even more meaningful, more fulfilling than either of them had ever imagined. Ella, with her vibrant energy and constant thirst for exploration, had spent the last few months reflecting on what it truly meant to be fulfilled. No longer consumed by the idea that success meant climbing higher, her perspective had shifted. Success, she had realized, was about embracing the people who mattered most, and the feeling of belonging that came from genuine connections. City life, as fulfilling as it had been, had shown her that there were some things money and fame couldn't provide, things like comfort, peace, and the unshakable connection she had with Lena. She now understood that true success wasn't just about individual achievement. It was about being together, helping one another to thrive, and sharing in the victories and challenges of life. Lena, for her part, had continued her work in the village, but the changes she had undergone were just as significant. She had once believed that her life in the village was a confining existence, but she now saw it as the foundation of her growth. The quiet rhythms of village life had given her the space to develop her own sense of purpose, to nurture the relationships that were important to her, and to build something sustainable, something grounded in honesty and self-reliance. She had learned to value what she had, and her heart no longer ached for the world beyond. Instead, she felt a deep appreciation for the roots she had planted here, and the understanding that her journey, just like Ella's, was a process of growth, not just for herself, but for the community she was nurturing. Together, the two women began to build a new vision for their future. They no longer saw their friendship as something fragile or temporary. They understood now that true connection was something that could adapt and evolve, just as they had. The distance that had once threatened to pull them apart was now an opportunity to grow stronger. Ella's visits to the village had become regular, and though their paths continued to diverge, they both understood that they had chosen to be part of each other's worlds, no longer as a source of dependency, but as equal partners in the journey of life. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat together in the familiar spot by the river. The air was warm with the scent of wildflowers, and the soft murmur of the water provided a calming backdrop to their quiet conversation. It was a moment of deep, abiding comfort, the kind of peace that only comes when two souls are in perfect harmony. I've been thinking, Ella said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them, about everything that's happened. About us, about the changes we've gone through. Lena turned her head toward her, her eyes soft with understanding. I've been thinking about that too, she said. I think I finally realized that what we have isn't just friendship, it's something more. It's a partnership, a bond that's grounded in love and respect, not an obligation or dependency. It's a choice we make every day to keep. Growing together. Asterisk Ella smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. I feel the same way. We've both changed so much. I've learned so much from you, Lena. I think we both have. Lena nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. We have. And I think that's what makes us so strong. We're not afraid of change anymore. We welcome it. The conversation shifted to their hopes for the future, both for themselves and for each other. There was no rush, no sense of urgency. They spoke of possibilities, of the dreams they each held close, and the things they had yet to explore. But more than anything, they spoke of togetherness, of the quiet joy that came from knowing that whatever the future held, they would face. It side-by-side dot as the stars began to twinkle above them and the night air grew cooler. They stood up together, ready to return to the village. Their journey together was far from over, and in the stillness of the night, they felt the deep certainty that they were walking the same path despite the world's ever-changing landscape. Ella placed her hand on Lena's shoulder, and for a moment, they simply stood there, gazing at the stars, knowing that they had found something rare, something that could weather any storm dot as the days passed. The world around them seemed to grow quieter, more reflective. The village, still touched by the golden hues of autumn, had settled into its own rhythm. And so had the lives of Ella and Lena. They no longer had the urgency they once did. Their lives no longer felt like a race, but rather like a series of small, deliberate steps toward an unknown future. Together, though Ella was still deeply rooted in the city, her visits to the village had become a regular part of their lives. But now, each visit held more significance. It was no longer about finding comfort in familiar places. It was about deepening the connection they had built, understanding that their friendship could grow and evolve without losing its essence. In their time apart, they had learned not to fear change, but to welcome it. One evening, while walking along the riverbank, they stopped to admire the clear skies and the way the stars began to twinkle above them. The world seemed at peace, and In the shared silence, they found themselves understanding the value of just being present together. I've been thinking, Lena said softly. Breaking the stillness between them, Ella turned to her, noticing the thoughtful look on her face. What about... Lena paused for a moment, searching for the right words. I think we've both changed a lot over the years. I've always wondered if we could go back to what we were before, if we could just relive the moments we shared before all the distance and the changes. But I don't think I want that anymore. Ella's gaze softened, her heart warming at Lena's. Words. What do you mean? Lena smiled, her expression gentle. I think what we have now is something even better. We're not trying to recreate the past anymore. We're living in the present, and we're both growing. I love that, Ella nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. I feel the same way. I used to think that things had to be perfect for us to be close. But now I realize that closeness isn't about perfection. It's about being able to share the journey, even if it doesn't look the way we expected. Their conversation lingered in the cool night air, and the stars above seemed to echo their newfound understanding. Life had changed, but their friendship had evolved alongside those changes, adapting in a way that allowed both of them to keep moving forward without losing what they had always shared. The future, though uncertain, no longer seemed like a challenge. It felt like an adventure, a new chapter that they would write together. As the evening drew to a close, they made their way back to the village. The moonlight bathed the path before them, casting a soft glow over the familiar streets they had once walked together. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt as though the world was no longer just about the past. They were standing on the threshold of something new, something exciting. In the quiet of the night, as they walked side by side, their steps in perfect sync, they both knew. One thing for sure, no matter where life would take them, they would always find their way back to each other. The future, for the first time, didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like the next chapter, one they would face together. As the seasons continued to shift, so did the nature of Ella and Lena's connection. The soft rustle of the autumn leaves turned into the chill of winter. Their bond remained as warm and steady as it had ever been. They had learned to cherish the moments they had, without the pressure of constantly needing to fix the past. Each meeting between them, whether in the city or the village, felt like a gentle reunion, a reassurance that they could keep growing together. Even when their paths seemed so different, Lena's small business had blossomed into something meaningful for her in the village. She had become not just a teacher, but an inspiration to other women who once feared stepping into their own power. Lena's work, which she had once doubted, now provided the community with hope and empowerment. The women who came to her for advice did not just find skills. They found confidence Lena had struggled to build for herself, but now knew how to share. Her village, once a place she felt confined by, had now become a space of endless possibilities. For Ella, the city life was still full of opportunity and inspiration. But something had shifted. She no longer saw herself in the endless pursuit of success as she once had. She had learned the true meaning of fulfillment and It had nothing to do with the accolades or the recognition of the world around her. It had everything to do with the connections she had and the love and understanding she shared with the people she chose to keep close. Yet, there was still one thing that Ella had been hesitant to explore: a more permanent return to the village. She had longed to stay, but the fear of losing herself in the familiarity of her old life had held her back. But now, with a renewed sense of confidence and the understanding that she had already evolved, the idea of living close to Lena felt more like a possibility than a challenge. One quiet afternoon, as snowflakes gently fell outside the window, Ella made her decision. She reached for her phone and with a soft smile dialed Lena's number. The familiar ring echoed in her ear, and as it picked up, Lena's voice was warm and welcoming, just as it always had been. "I'm coming back, Lena," Ella said, her voice soft but resolute. "I think it's time for a new chapter. For both of us." Lena's breath caught on the other end of the line, and for a moment, there was silence, a beautiful, calm silence that held more meaning than any words could. "I've been waiting for you," Lena replied, her voice full of warmth and anticipation. "It's going to be different this time, Ella. We're ready for this." Ella smiled as the weight of the decision lifted from her chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt as if the world had aligned in the way it was always meant to be. She wasn't going back to the past. She was stepping forward into a new beginning, not just for herself, but for the friendship that had weathered every storm. The days that followed were filled with excitement and preparation. Ella packed up her life in the city, but she wasn't leaving behind the person she had become. She was bringing that version of herself to the village, ready to create something new with Lena, ready to build a life that was not just about home, but about shared growth. When the day came for her to arrive, the village was just as she remembered: quiet, peaceful, and full of life. It felt as if the past and present had merged seamlessly. They were no longer bound by expectations, but were free to create something fresh, something authentic. The village no longer held the same sense of restriction for her. It had transformed, just as she had thought as Ella and Lena stood together by the river, the same spot where they had once dreamed of the future. They now looked out on a world of endless possibilities. The sunset painted the sky with brilliant shades of pink and orange, and the world felt alive with new beginnings. "We've come full circle," Ella said softly, her eyes meeting Lena's. Lena nodded, a peaceful smile on her face. "And we're just getting started." They stood together, side by side, as the night began to settle in, the quiet sounds of nature surrounding them. It was the beginning of something new, not just for them, but for the life they would build, hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever came next.